Hello there. Bandana, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Louis.
Thank you for joining me today. You are one of the people I have missed seeing in person during this pandemic.
And I have missed you.
Thank you.
All the fun and frolic with sustainable fashion right now is
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we have a lot we can talk about, and I think first of all, I'm just honored that you're here talking with me today. You've been one of my friends, and really, whether you knew it or not, inspire and mentor me throughout these last years since I've known you, because I have appreciated so much of the truth that you bring to this industry in many ways. And so for the audience who doesn't know you, you were part of the big machine of the Vogue family and the whole fashion conversation for so long. And you made a pivot a couple of years ago. And not only did you step down from that role, but you also but you left India. And so first of all, I just want to say, tell us a little bit about you and your journey in the fashion industry and where that brings you today.
Louis, I mean, it's been a roller coaster, and I'm so grateful because I did work for Vogue India. I was part of the founding team when we launched in India, and it was so much fun. It's just the time of your life when you don't question too many things and you just go with the ride. And it was incredible. As a journalist, I'm a writer. I was a fashion features director for 11 years, and I became editor at large for 2 years when I moved to Bali. And that whole span of my professional life was really about engaging with the real creative people of our industry, to be able to sit with Karl Lagerfeld, to be able to sit with John Galliano, and you name any of these designers face to face and ask about their creative skills and their journey and the trajectory in the fashion industry was incredible. I couldn't have asked for anything more. There was no barriers. It was direct. It was the best experience of my life. However, because, I'm Nepalese by birth, I've grown up in India. I come from a part of the world where the world is so bifurcated in countries like India, where the rich and the poor, the rural and the urban, the English and the vernacular, it's so sharp. The difference is so sharp that there is, in my mind, it was a personal journey. Through the years of being in high fashion, I also got to a point where I started questioning my own integrity and what I was really doing within the industry that I love very much. And seeing the kind of disparity, the inequalities, the environmental damage, and what have you, as we get to learn along the way, because no one teaches you. You have to literally, rummage through and educate yourself in the world of sustainability, because it wasn't taught to me in school.
Very, very true.
And that's when I decided to pivot. And I guess the idea of sustainability, we talk about it in massive brush strokes that are huge. For me, it was a very personal journey. For me, I couldn't live in a city that was so loud and so huge. I wasn't sustainable emotionally. And so moving to Bali with my daughter, I'm a single mother. She's now 18 years old. I put her in, it's called the Green School. It's a phenomenal, sustainable school in the middle of the jungles in Bali. And when we moved here, it became very clear, my journey from high fashion, where I learned everything from and enjoyed and savored every bit of it, to come to a place that is connected to nature. And so connected that we are literally walking barefoot and nothing matters. It's the trees, it's the environment. That made me really pivot to being an activist in the world of sustainability. It came very naturally to me to be able to uphold the ideals of the humankind, of mindfulness, of compassion, that is not only extended to human beings, but to the environment, to nature.
Yes.
So for me, it was certainly a huge pivot. It couldn't have been more dramatic. But in my own heart, I know that it came so organically that nothing felt, that I had to push for it or that I had to.
Yeah. I love that. There's so many things that came to mind as you were talking right now. One of them was sort of this dichotomy of the life that you had where you were in Paris and London and New York, and you were seeing front row, literally, for these shows and meeting one-on-one with some of the world's most creative fashion designers, if not the most creative. And then you're also living somewhere where you see the disparity, as you describe it, of how things are made, who's suffering for these things to be made, what the truth is behind, from an environmental and a social and labor perspective, the impact of this very beautiful industry on one hand, and then when I opened this up by saying that I think you're a truth teller because you really did see, and then we're not willing to not speak what you were seeing. And you also said something really interesting, which is relating it to mindfulness, which I want to talk about, because I believe that you saw something even before the pandemic hit, which is that we're all being asked now to address, are our lives more sustainable? Are we as individuals making the right choices around how we live, how our products, et cetera? And you made that call to move to Bali and to sort of seek something differently before the pandemic. But so there's a bunch of comments and questions in there. Let's maybe take it one piece at a time. But tell me about sort of that disparity and how that truth really drove you to sort of seeing a more spiritual, mindful approach to this work.
Yeah, Lewis, and we've been part of the fashion industry for a long time. And one of the glaring facts about our industry is that we were hoodwinked into believing that whatever was beautiful, a product, just existed as a product. We never went behind the curtains. We did not ask what was the backstory of something that is being made beautifully, whether it's a dress or a bag. So in the process of just putting beautiful models with beautiful clothes on the ramp, we as consumers, and I'm from the media, trust me, I'm, I'm part of the problem that just made it magical for consumers to believe that everything exists on the ramp. There's no backstory. So for me, when I made that pivot and you open your world to what is the backstory, how many hands touch a bag that is being made that you're going to spend thousands of dollars for, or a beautiful garment, there are tons of people who are invisible, they are faceless, they don't have their rights. And we have seen through COVID, all these systems collapsed, right? And suddenly the wounds that already existed, for instance, just became glaring and opened even further. It doesn't mean it wasn't there before. It's just that we chose not to see it because we lived in such a beautiful, fancy la la land where everything was about aesthetics and beauty and not about people or purpose or process. So I talk a lot about the different P's that happen to just sort of come along. A product is nothing anymore if we don't understand what the process is, who the people are behind it, and what purpose does it serve. And I know I'm a bit of an idealist because a lot of people will continue to believe in things and revenge shopping and what have you. But I think we have a choice. We have a choice to understand that when we want something beautiful, I think it's important to ask where it comes from, how it was made, are we paying fairly, who are the people involved in this entire process, the supply chain, the creative chain. That's what I need to do personally. I need to be more responsible personally before I go around pointing a finger and saying, oh, come on, sustainability, these are issues that have to be solved by the government or by NGOs. What about my responsibility? So that's what really made me think about diving deeper into the processes of fashion.
Yeah. So in doing so, did you find that there were moments where speaking up within the context of who you were writing about and who you were writing for, did you find that a challenge, or was it a pretty fluid process to begin speaking out and attaching more of an activist approach to your view of this industry?
Oh, it's definitely a challenge. It was a challenge because I wanted to talk about how fashion should be addressed in the context of sustainability in a cool, fun way in the great magazines of the world, mainstream fashion magazines that are very popular. It wasn't about being, humdrum and being banal or, like karmic fate, that we all doomed. That wasn't the way I want to talk about sustainability.
Mhm.
It was what can we do better? But we have to have this conversation consistently, right? So I was actually tired of magazines that would have the sustainability issue, the green issue. Usually it would be a January issue because you're beginning a new year, you want to clean up your closet and blah, blah. And then for
Right.
the next 11 months, you don't talk about it. And so it became another trend. It became a trend. So, what purpose did it serve? I don't think it did, because the idea of being a sustainable consumer has to be ingrained consistently, month after month, day after day, in the magazines that we make. It should be mainstream. Sustainability should be mainstream. Why should we just prop it as a trend that comes once a year? So it was certainly a challenge because, I just thought, my gosh, these powerful magazines,
Mhm.
they have such a huge scope and bandwidth and footprint and what have you. How could you not take up this cause? Because we are directly beholden to the sanity of our environment because of the way we consume. So how
Mhm.
could we not talk about it to educate our consumers, who, by the way, why should they know? Why would they know about sustainability if we've never talked about it? So for
Yep.
me, it was, we need to do it consistently, not just as a trend. And that's
Yes.
exactly what happened with most magazines. It
Mhm.
became a trend. And
Yep.
and maybe because of COVID, the issues of environmental damage and all of that came up front. So the conversation is quite ripe right now.
It is,
So
isn't
I'm
it?
grateful
Yep.
for that. I'm very grateful for that. But before that, I have to confess, it was very frustrating to be
Yep.
able to say this has to be part of our agenda
Mhm.
month by month.
Well, it's very similar to how it is with inside a brand retailer or manufacturer. It cannot be a separate department with a carved out person who has to go bang on the doors of all the other departments and ask them to take a meeting. It really has to be a functionality that exists in the design team conversations, in the supply chain sourcing conversations, in the colors, the dye source. It has to show up in sort of every touch point of decision making within an organization for it to be real. Otherwise, it's too easy for this to sort of feel like that capsule collection trend approach that you and I are both so familiar with, because that's a lot of how this work got started. Was, let's do a collection that we're just going to feature this to see if people are even interested. And then it, over time, that evolves to, well, we just different types of materials, maybe we could use those materials in our mentions. And, oh, well, we're already producing with those responsible ethical suppliers, can we move that into our mainstream, right? And media is doing the same thing, which is responding by bringing this conversation more into a mainstream approach, and as you said, consistent every issue, every newsletter, et cetera, not just once or twice a year in the months of January and April or whenever it was designated to be appropriate, right?
Absolutely. I think we need, because the industry has so many pillars, right? Whether it is accessing of the raw materials to manufacturing to producing, the media, the events, the fashion weeks. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many pillars that support this industry. I think we need to deep dive into everyone's responsibility. What can you do to make systemic changes within the pillar that you fall within? So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I met this incredible person, and I have to touch base with him. He was doing a research on what's the carbon footprint of the fashion weeks all over the world, right?
Oh, well, yeah.
So they were tabulating statistics to show what would the carbon footprint of Paris Fashion Week be, or Milan, or New York.
Mm-hmm.
And, we never thought about these things before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one pillar of our industry, the events. Think about all the others, how we access our cotton and how we are paying the workers in factories. Unfortunately, the Western world, where most of the garments are made in the Eastern world, forget that the, the Asian countries are being pillaged environmentally for, if I may say so, the greed of consumerism in the Western world. I live in Indonesia. The filthiest river in the world is in Indonesia. And why is it the filthiest? Because they're factories that are manufacturing fast fashion goods for the international world and pouring acidic dyes, for instance, into these rivers. I mean, the ramification of this is huge in countries like India, Indonesia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Bangladesh. Well, I don't need to tell you, Lewis, that degradation is a degradation of human life. We've forgotten that in this process of hyper creativity, this notion of novelty that we've all been sucked into, that you need to have more and more, faster and faster, it's ruining the environment socially, politically, emotionally, economically, in countries that are the suppliers, the manufacturers for the Western world. I just feel like this is time when we should really sit back and think, you think it's just a t-shirt? It's not just a t-shirt. It's someone's livelihood somewhere in the world that is being tormented, perhaps.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, I'm also thinking about this values-based approach on really, and I think this is something that we hear talk about in the pandemic world of like really a reset, and people need to people have had the ability to slow down and really look at their values. But I think it's one of the first things we need to ask ourselves in relationship to our relation to fashion in general, or to apparel, or regardless of whether it's accessories, leather, footwear, jewelry. All of it has an impact. And I'm curious to this part of, we mentioned mindfulness and truth telling, but once you know better, then how you align that to personal individual journey and also your own spiritual and or philosophical beliefs about what's right, i.e. your values, right? So tell me about that.
Oh, absolutely. I think the wonderful thing about to be living in nature, surrounded by less noise, certainly less noise than what I came from, which is the bustling city of Bombay with like 20 million people in one city. As much as I loved it, when you come to a place like Bali, it does open up, ways of thinking, ways of perception that is very dramatically different from when you're living in very urban places, right? And so I deep dived into my own heritage of wisdom. And it's secular. It may sound religious, but it's not. There's secular. And one of the things that I've been reading about and practicing is, there's wonderful concepts of dharma and karma. Now, you may have seen it as, tattooed on people's arms and legs and whatever. We see it as words, dharma and karma. But if you look at it scientifically, it's cause and effect. Dharma is your moral compass. That is your own fulcrum. What do you want to do when a certain situation presents itself? That decision and free will is yours. Your dharma, that is your moral compass. What you choose to do after that defines your karma or your destiny. So a lot of times people think, oh my gosh, karma, destiny, I'm doomed because it is my destiny. No, you have a choice. You have a choice to look after your environment. You have a choice to look after the welfare of people that you buy from. You have that choice. You have that free will. You are the first person to pull out your own wallet, use your hard-earned money to buy a product. So that is your dharma. You can make a decision based on free will. But once you make that decision, it could be that you buy a polyester shirt that damages our environment. It could be that you buy something fancy, but someone is sitting in Bangladesh suffering because of why you buy things so cheap. That act will decide what your karma is. So for me, these are not just philosophies that exist in an abstract world. I think if we actualize them, then I'm very cognizant of my decisions. I can step back and say, I have a choice. Why would I want to buy something that degrades my environment or its people when I can buy something else that is more fulfilling and mindful? That's my conscious choice. And that choice.
Oh, go ahead. No, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, I was going to say, do you think consumers really want to know the details? Because there's a big push for transparency on where and how things are made and sharing the data. What's the carbon footprint? What's the social? Are they getting a fair living wage? Is this supply chain connected at all to forced labor? We're going to know all this if we want it. And investors will invest in the right platforms and technologies, and brands and retailers will invest in building that data. But I think only if there's a need and an interest on one side. I mean, I think it's going to happen anyway, but it will accelerate if people will say, I want this information and I will use this to make purchasing decisions. What do you think?
But I live with an 18-year-old daughter, so I'm surrounded by post-millennials. And I can tell you, there is a huge difference in the way I look at fashion. I looked at fashion at their age and the way they look at fashion today. And we've seen tons of research, right? Millennials and post-millennials asking brands to do better, inquiring about their CSR policies, for instance, trying to understand the whole supply chain and where things are made. It is going to be the norm. If any brand thinks that, this is just a passing phase or a trend, they are mistaken. You are not going to be a successful brand if you do not have the seeds of sustainability already injected into your business plan. Because we are just, I feel like a novice. Like, I had to teach myself sustainability. I'm not an academic like you, Louis. I came from the Vogue world, which is like more and more, bigger is better, and what have you. I had to teach myself. But there are kids now growing up in an environment where they feel unsafe because of the consumerism that preceded their generation. For them, it's a real issue. So when Greta Thunberg can, accelerate this conversation on a global level with her peers, there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic about the younger generation that will demand better. And I'm also extremely confident in saying that if you are going to be a brand worth knowing, you cannot not be sustainable. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a choice.
Yeah. I'm with you. And as you know, because you've been helping guide us on some of this, we're working on a docuseries around what the next generation not only has to say about this topic, but what they're building and developing and what kinds of real creativity and genius is emerging on the scene. And so thank you for your input on that work, because I'm with you. I think it's the most, if you want to find the dark, you can find the dark. But if you want to find the optimistic and the silver lining, really invest in the next generation, because they've had no choice other than to address this. And so they come at it not as defeatists, but as this is the work of our time, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, whereas I think you can get people who are older and they'd be like, oh, this is too heavy of a lift. I can't do it. Yeah.
I mean, I feel really blessed because I am surrounded by a very young generation of, teenagers who, thinking so differently certainly from someone like me. And they're all into thrift shopping, they're into clothes swapping. The whole exchange, the economy of fashion for them is completely different from just running and buying, 10 t-shirts from a fast fashion company because it costs $2. They post their pictures on Instagram. This is what I want to exchange or sell. So they have a different system in place. And I believe that it's happening all over the world. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I just read research where it says that secondhand clothing business is going to overtake fast fashion very soon.
That's amazing. Isn't that remarkable? Send me that because I want to read about that. I mean, it is remarkable how much it's taken on. I think it's one of the top trends on TikTok is the reselling and the thrifting and the sharing and remaking of apparel. So what inspires you and what's it getting you excited? What are you coming alive with?
It's so funny. I thought I had committed professional harakiri when I left Vogue. Everyone's like, who leaves Vogue when you're doing
Right.
a great job, you're top, you're blah, 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 whatever. But, I feel so passionately about talking about sustainability within the fashion industry. It just doesn't feel like a chore, or it's a happy place for me to be able to talk about it. And I'm so excited. Like, okay, now I can talk about philosophy and sustainability. Now I can talk about spirituality and sustainability. I can take my environment here in Bali and make that into an inspiration for why I am in this journey. It's so personal for me. And that's when I realized we are taught to make our lives either professional or personal. Leave your work at the door. Don't bring your work home. That's what we were
Yes.
ingrained into believing. And for me now, that's completely gone. What is professional is personal. So
Mm.
it drives, what gets me excited is when I'm doing a podcast with a teenager, a design student who's got 10 followers, and she's like, I'm just on this journey. Please, can you be part of my podcast? I'm like, hell yes, I would
Yep.
love to be part of, I go into my DMs on my Instagram and I get all these requests from these young people. And it's not about how famous they are or what a big platform that they have. I don't care. When they say they've started this journey, I will give my time to them. And so that gets me excited.
That's beautiful. You reminded me of a Robert Frost poem that says, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure, yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to join my vocation and my avocation. My two eyes make one in sight. And
Whoa,
that's what, yeah, I heard that when I went to business school and I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to bring my passion, my personal interest, what brings me alive, and my professional development and interests, and I want to bring the two together. And I think, that's always been my advice to the next generation and younger people when they ask me what to do about this, just follow what brings you alive, because that's where you're going to thrive. Yeah. That's so wonderful. So I could just talk to you for hours on end, and we'll have that opportunity soon somewhere in one of our mutual gatherings when the world reopens for us. But any parting wisdom or advice that you want to give to anyone who's listening to this around how they should address or embrace this work, whether they're inside a company who's thinking about doing this work or is doing this work, or just an average citizen human who's passionate about this topic and wants to learn more?
Well, I'm going to address the average consumer like me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not a policymaker. I don't own a company. I'm not a manufacturer. I'm an average consumer. So my message to all of us who are consumers is taken from Mahatma Gandhi. Be the change that you want to see in the world. That's what he said, right? What that means in a very deeper level is that take responsibility, take personal ownership for the choices that you make. Because personal responsibility leads to social impact. So it is the unit that is going to help the collective. But the collective doesn't exist without the unit. So we undermine what our own choices are as consumers, our own power. So this personal responsibility for me is very important, because how do I reach out to people who are not in the business, but we're constantly buying, right? We as consumers, we're always buying, whether you are a teenager or an adult, that's it. So let's take ownership. Of course, all the other people have to play their part. The policymakers have to do it, the governments have to do it, manufacturers have to do it. But your personal ownership for social impact and change rests in your own free will and your own responsibility. And I think that cannot be undervalued.
Beautiful. I agree. I love it. Well, you're inspiring me, so I know you're going to inspire many others, not only with this podcast, but just in all you do. And we'll include some links to some of your wonderful TED Talks, and I think there's just so much richness around the way you approach this work. So thank you for your gift, not only today, but just the gift of yourself and your vision and talent to all of us.
Oh, thank you, Lewis, and the team. I feel
Yes.
very grateful. I really do feel grateful because who's going to even notice? I'm like, I'm in a jungle somewhere, and then you're like, do you want to be part of this?
Absolutely, absolutely. We wouldn't miss not having you on this discussion. So it is Lewis and Friends after all, right? So
Yes.
Thank you for being my friend.
Thank you for having me, and I can't wait to see you again, Lewis.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.